content of this channel is for mature audiences. Parental discretion is advised. You're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. Please make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell notification button. And please, feel free to share the video. Thank you.
What's good, everybody? What's cracking? I'm GG and you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. It's the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up with no chasers, man. And before I get things started, I want to give a shout out to all the haters out there. I know you all are lurking. Please make sure to like the video or to give it a thumbs down if you're a hater. If you're one of the good people out here, man, make sure you like the video. So as per usual, you see the graphic, man. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hit the bell notification button so you can stay on top of what's going on here on the Green Gorilla channel. And also, if you watch the Green Gorilla channel from a mobile device, make sure that you turn on your notifications on your mobile device so that way you can actually access the stream when it's going down, or you can have access to content when it goes down. But anyway, as I always do, shout out to Electrician 480 and all the other people out there in the chat, man. God bless. But like I always do, I want to give a shout out to all of the members. I'm going to leave that up. I want to give a shout out to all the members of the Green Gorilla channel, and I'm going to do it without all the bells and whistles and the air horns. I'm just going to run through it and get right to my guest. So shout out to John J, Afro National, Sherlyn Woe, Ricky Dawson, Stefan, Julius Ferguson, Lord Hamal, True 7360, Mr. Me Too, Call for President, I'm Just Jules, Broken Blade, Leading from the Back, J. Cleveland Green, Brotherly Love, Gold Professor, Seventh Coast Dojo, Lee Ways, AKs and Curtains, H-Town, Roguish the Buildmonger, BD Main, Adrian Thomas, Electrician 480, Gabinga, Cutting Up with the Jones, Zanko, D. Scott, Path Guy, Black Swerve 404, Pete Rock 496, Tahuti of New Comet, Aaron Peters, Barnolas, Dar, Michael Ross, Vincent Lindsay, Michael Pierce, Beautiful Trauma, Quiz the Poet, Black Wizard 80OS, Jazz Tech, Shadow Observer, Sugar T, Artisan MC, Nasiana, Kyle J. Sura, Kareem, Troy Warren, Jeff R., Mrs. KP Bailey, Alan Wiley, The Face, Mantis on Break, Life of Commerce, Dreamlit, A. Wilson's Ghost, Timothy Blewett, Jeffrey Speed, Marvin Battle Jr., Mark Holt, Afro Troop TV, Adam, BGS Ibmore, Ignatz Mouse, Brian Peaks, Papa Didas, Scott Haywood, Black Uru Strikes, Dr. Tree 33, Leroy Honeycutt, Super Tech, 77 Base X, Brian McMurray, Karen S., Anthony Davis, Charles Rogers, Rick Ross, Sandra Jean, Charles Gilmore, Patricia Colley, Greg, Barry Little, Mr. Valentino, Jason Hales, Black Men Being Brutally Honest, Cameron 87, Doc LaRock, Mark Swift, Odd Collar, Donald Watts, Coach Hotep, Old Soul Chief, Mr. Blue Collar, TD Hip Hop Media, Drew Main, Mr. E, Sir Anthony, MLR, Universal 178, Rasheed Barnes, Aaron Smith, DH, The Revelator, Aaron Infinite, Dr. Tiasan Johnson, Kalonja Kala, Hostile Adept, and WPR1. I can't forget my brothers David Carroll, Forrest Windu, and Kevin Samuels. Big up to all y'all, man. And also, I got to give a shout out to all of the members of my Patreon page. So shout out to Prince D. Martini, Daxby, J Live, Rashawn Phillip Sorrells, Keith Bass, Nick, Rock One, Albert C, Dr. Ben Vincent, I Am the Light of My Father, Waffle Weave, William Joyner, Tyrone Hampton, Darnell Smith, Excalibur, Anu 219, Preserve Prisoner, Taz, Dragon 59, Jay Bailey, Mr. Michi Momal, and the Sanguine. Big up to all y'all, man. Thank you so much for your support. And, if indeed you would like to also help support the Green Gorilla channel, here's how you do it, and then we'll be back with what's going on with the show. What's good, everybody? I'm the G with a PhD, and you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla Channel, the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chaser. Today, I want to introduce you to my new membership program that consists of 5 levels where you can invest in the Green Gorilla Channel on a monthly basis and receive level-specific perks. Memberships are special because they improve the quality of the content of the channel and will help me to be able to keep the channel going. Now, to participate in the Green Gorilla Channel membership program, all you have to do is hit the join button, which is located right next to the subscribe button on my channel page. Now, for all of my subscribers who decide not to participate in my membership program, nothing will change. The content will keep coming the way it always has. Thanks for watching, and be careful out here, people. Bless. All right, good people. I'm Gigi. I'm back. And of course, you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla Channel, the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up with no chasers. And, I want people to be aware of the following fact.
The content of this channel is for mature audiences. Parental discretion is advised.
Yeah, so if you hear some things that sound, vulgar or obscene, I'm warning you. This is a place where black men can say what they want to say, how they want to say it, unfiltered and unhampered by moral norms associated with religion and political correctness. And if we don't have a place where we can be open and candid, I mean, you got men, who are coming forth and issuing Victorian virtues and extolling sanctimony. I'm not with that, man. Look, if you don't like the content, man, just straight up break wide, man. Fly left. Go somewhere else. But if you want to hear the real deal, unfettered, unhampered, untrammeled, uncorrupted by political correctness, this is the place to be. So at any rate, man, I got some friends along. I got my brother Nameless, Protagonist, and my brother. He's calling himself General Drapetomania now. But peace to the brethren out there, man. Peace to y'all, man. What's cracking with you, man?
Dog, man, another day, another dollar, man. You know what I'm saying? As Outkast said, man, just out here crumbling herb. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, man, you don't want to be crumbling herb. Well, you can crumble it now in certain states. It's okay to do it now in certain states. They have advertisements on YouTube now with people talking about you can buy this herb and it makes me feel so tranquil and nice and all of this shit. I'm like, where was that, man, in the 2000s, bruh?
That's what I want to know.
When they was kicking down doors looking for dope and shit. I mean, small packs of dope.
Correct.
Where was that energy, man? So we got to get into this. And, I'm not going to give any preliminary comments at all. I'm going to let you all take over. I will chime in as I deem necessary or to underscore some of the things that you said, but I do have to say this, though. So I'll take it back, no preliminary remarks. Most of the drug laws in America were started for racialized reasons. That's just flat out what it is. There's a historical record of this. And we already know white people use drugs, and they use harder drugs than black people do. And they deal drugs more than black people do. Those are just the facts, okay? But the face of the drug addict is us. How did that happen? How did we become the poster child for drug pathology when they deal and use drugs more than anyone else in the entire country? And I'm not talking about just volume of numbers, because they outnumber us in relation to numbers, just mere numbers, okay? But we're talking about per capita, okay? We're talking about per 100. They deal and they use more than we do. So y'all take over, gentlemen. I'm going to lay in the wings for a second, but I will chime in.
Yeah, facts. And for those of you who when we talked the last time, if you can remember, right, we reached up to the point where we were talking about Cointelpro. And so if you understand the path of African Americans in the United States, then one of the things that you'll understand is that a lot of what influenced the freedoms that we have, at least from the perspective that I'm seeing it and what I've read, it happened on behalf of the United States begrudgingly. So when you get to the Civil Rights Act, before Kennedy died, so Kennedy will be in Vienna, right? Them and people, delegates from the Soviet Union, looking to face off in terms of who's going to influence the world or what system is going to influence the world, and to get people to co-sign to it. And during that time, you had the killings of the Freedom Riders, right? And so during that conference of Vienna, that will bring great embarrassment to the United States, to the President of the United States, their delegation, and whatever our international agenda was, right? Because again, how can you promote America or say that America is leader of the free world when you just had it where, young people were killed, riding from state to state, simply seeking voting rights. And so now when you, in the midst of this geopolitical battle, what you have to remember is that at that time you had J. Edgar Hoover, right, who had formed the Bureau of Investigation around the time of Marcus Garvey, and that was his whole intent, right, was to disrupt, discredit, and destroy that movement, right, to the point where he said, if there's going to be a Black Messiah, I'm going to make him. Now, if you kind of fast forward, a little bit into that, now you get into another geopolitical drama, right? Hence the war on drugs. So now, especially in the 20th century, you're coming off the Vietnam War. You got soldiers using drugs. And one of the biggest reasons, so at this particular time in America, crime is beginning to rise. And so basically, to Green Gorilla's point, they're starting to blame, African Americans and drugs, to say that, we are the problem. This is why you have moral decay, in inner cities, right? So, the war on drugs in and of itself, and I'll make it as simple as possible, right? Again, it was a global campaign using federal intervention, using federal and international intervention to stop the drug trade.
Well, let me interject a little context here as
Yeah.
well, because we have to remember about what's happening now with this conversation about this concept of great society. And
Yeah.
I really want to push forward what you have with Cointelpro and understanding that this was not known to the public. Cointelpro operated like root. People knew about the ONBU or the CIA iteration of that. But what they didn't know was the Federal Bureau of Investigation utilizing a secret cartel of individuals that operated within the shadow to hyper survey individuals, specifically those that were associated with what could be classified as communism or any sort of socialist leaning ideology in a political group, followed by Black people in general who at all appeared to be rooted in some sort of involvement with civil rights specifically. Because we need to remember that the concept of being involved in civil rights was seen as a socialist ideology in general. And so it was not classified as being part of government policy as it pertained to its international policy. And it was gaining a measure of approval overseas with other individuals that were in alignment with communism. So there was this projection of Black folks being a potential when I say in group, I mean a domestic enemy or domestic political other that needed to be contended and have the power of the state leveraged against it. You take that in conjunction with what's going on with this greater society idea, and with J. Edgar Hoover going from state to state and employing concepts such as undercover police officers, which wasn't a thing prior to that, for the sake of this, quote, war on crime. which becomes kind of a buzzword and a precursor to what we see with this idea of the war on drugs, end quote. And it's with this sort of context that we enter into the 60s. And post-civil rights, we have a new issue that's beginning this spring, which is this focus on individuals who are anti-war and other spreading of communism in Central and South America. Particularly, we're going to be talking about the Contra Wars, because this sets the entire context of not only funding, but a political agenda to address folks who are rising to power, such as Che Guevara and what's going on with Cuba.
That's facts. So I don't know if you want me to do this really quickly, but what I can do is kind of like go over an article that'll give you some historical context of the emanation of drug laws from America's racist past. Now, if you don't want to do that because you think you're going to cover it already, I'll just be quiet and let you do that.
No, let's do that.
I'll come into it, right, and then please interject, because I believe that I'm gonna touch on it. Right.
Okay, so I'll be quiet then.
Yeah. So come in, so you can come in and interject, right? And so, and so ultimately, right, so this is the war on drugs. And so ultimately, quote and unquote, is to kill the supply chain of psychoactive drugs, right? And so psychoactive drugs are things that, manipulate or change the function of your nervous system. So the term the war on drugs will become popularized after a press conference that Nixon had in 1971, right? So now when you get into, I forget the sister's name. So when you get into, what's called the new Jim Crow, right?
Michelle Alexander is whom you're talking about.
Alexander. Thank you.
But before you go any further, I want to do some housekeeping really quickly before I forget to do it at all.
No.
Shout out to nobody, like that clever trickster Ulysses, who basically stabbed the eye of the Cyclops so he wouldn't get killed during the Odyssey. Shout out to nobody. Shout out to Greg Wilson. Shout out to Jay Cleveland Green 2 times, man. Big up to y'all. Thank you so much for your support on the Cash App, which does work. Just letting you know. Peace out. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, so it becomes, popularized by Nixon now. Again, it goes back to say, so even before Nixon, right, it's like I was saying, you have, crime is rising, not because of Black people rioting in the streets, but it's more or less a rise in the population because, a lot of boomers now are starting to become adults. But, but the government uses that as an opportunity to demonize Black people, because during that time, the enemies of the state will be 2 groups of people, right? People who are anti-war, and then also the Blacks. So these people will be a threat to whatever the geopolitical agenda is to the United States, from both from without and then also from within. And so when you get into the war on drugs, what they would do is you would get heroin, right? So heroin is now something that's attached to Black people, and this is where you get this stereotype of the drunk, the junkie, and everything else. And then hippie is something that marijuana is something that lazy hippies do, right? And they, tree huggers and all of that other stuff, and they just hang out and engage in immoral activities. So basically, now, especially, on the Republican side in the '64 election, where you have Barry Goldwater, right? And Barry Goldwater is, along with others, are talking about how America's urban centers have become places of rioting and looting, because, quote and unquote, Black people and the left at that particular time are immoral, and and we need to be tough. We need to have law and order, as they would say, or Goldwater would say, is peace through strength, right? So they want to, impose force on these particular groups, but Black people in particular that we're talking about now, in order to rein people in, So this is kind of where you get the tough on crime rhetoric, because we are quote and unquote, out of control, right? And so now, You have, and some people will say that it's a misquote, and this will come from a man by the name of John Erkelman, right? And he says they knew they couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, right? And so again, and this is what they did, to demonize, and like I said, to demonize those groups. Now, the funny part is that when you look at the war on drugs completely, or what's actually pretty sad, is at the end of the day, all of these things to kind of either disrupt, to discredit, along with COINTELPRO, the ideas of the black community, the ideas of the black community. You have the U.S. government now spending billions, or ultimately trillions of dollars in terms of dealing with this quote and unquote drug trade and the black scourge that comes with it.
Well, hold up, Sandog. Let me
make
sure people understand this quote you're talking about. Number one, I just put a link to the speech that Nixon had. Not Nixon. Was it Nixon? Yeah, I think it was. No, it's Lyndon B. When he was talking about this whole idea of where the war on crime came from. You can see the whole congressional address in that link. It's a PDF you can download. But number one, I want to make sure people understand the quote you're making reference to. It was one of Nixon's aides in 1969. And he states, and I'll just say it verbatim here so you guys understand, quote, "You want to know what this, quote, war on drugs was really about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people." You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or blacks, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did, end quote. And this was supposedly said by John Echelman. I don't know how to say his name. Echelman, assistant to the president of domestic affairs under the Nixon administration. And that's important because whether that was actually quoted accurately or not, that's essentially what happened. And we need to understand that in response to this, we get the Black Panther Party going out of their way to start watching and filming police. I want to put these two things side by side because there's two major organizations that spawn in their downfall and their death spiral with the death of J. Edgar Hoover later on. About, 71 he dies? It's before 72. But, it's the beginnings of some of these organizations we'll be talking about later that get pinned and utilized and you know what? Let me be careful how I say this. We will say established by the downfall of the Black Panther movement, set the stages for infiltration later and misappropriation and blame allocation to certain groups of people to fund this whole concept going on in the Contra. I hope we talk about this because I think this is key when we get to Oliver North later to show the motive behind how they double dip into using this crap.
But let me just say this, okay? So I do want to interject. It's no strange secret that poor and working class people and people of color, through the alleged pursuit of drugs in the United States, it doesn't start with the Vietnam War, okay? This can be traced back to the 1850s with anti-immigration hostility basically came to the fore with a new wave of Chinese immigrants who basically landed in San Francisco, okay? So the funny thing about it is, what's ironic, is that these San Francisco Chinese immigrants were actually fleeing from violence and domination, which was caused by the Opium Wars. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Opium Wars, but you can go look it up. That's when Great Britain, now the UK, or, some people don't like to equivocate Great Britain with the UK, so I'm not going to do that. But anyway, at the time, Great Britain forced the sale of opium on the Chinese and addicted millions of Chinese people on drugs. This is what they did, okay? So when the Chinese came to the U.S., it was perceived that they were a threat to the economic security of white American workers. So that's when the government began to criminalize the act of smoking opium, okay? Which was only specific to the Chinese, okay? And it's traced back again to the Opium Wars. So the ban was basically against smoking opium as a strategic way, of banning the drug. Well, a pivot away from banning the drug itself, because actually you could drink opium. Like all this syrup sipping is nothing new, okay? Syrup sipping has been like an American phenomenon going back to, the early part of the 18th century.
Right. Yeah. Especially during the Civil War. Yeah. Especially during the Civil War. Yeah.
And one of the things that you have to understand is that the biggest dope head in the United States, the biggest addict, guess what the demographic is? And not just white people, but a specific demographic of white people. Who was the biggest dope head?
The wealthy.
The white woman, the white housewife, the white woman. She was the biggest dope head. So take that, okay? But so the first thing they began to do was to demonize the Chinese, okay? Now, in the 30s, you get another wave of immigrants coming from Mexico, okay? And the Mexicans brought with them this tradition of smoking cannabis. And that's what it was called in America prior to being, called marijuana. I mean, if you don't know, okay? So everybody in America was pretty much aware of what cannabis was, because it was also in most tinctures and cough syrups, okay? It was available in most medicines in the 30s, okay? 1930s is what I'm talking about, okay? And marijuana is a Mexican word, okay? And so when Mexicans began to threaten white working class jobs, the media began to play on public fears about them. And it also began to demonize smoking marijuana, okay? And so, most Americans because the American public is really not all that bright. I mean, we like to think that the average U.S. citizen is pretty adept, modernized, pretty much savvy historically. But the reality is that these people didn't even know that they were imbibing marijuana by imbibing cannabis, which is crazy, okay? So all of this would culminate eventually, and most also, it's important for people to understand that the initial prohibition, which kind of paved the way for all of the other prohibitions on substances that would be considered psychotropic, these come from, the effort to, prohibit the imbibement of alcohol, okay? Now, I don't know about you guys, but have you had a drink in your life? Have you had a drink? Sand Dog, have you ever drank alcohol?
No, I haven't. But
I haven't either. But
I've been around many. I have been around many, right, who are connoisseurs.
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah, my brother
Well,
does.
so the two guys here have never imbibed alcohol. I can say honestly, I have. Okay. The only thing I really drink is Budweiser or, some sort of ale if I'm around a whole bunch of artsy-fartsy people, okay? I'll drink what they drink, and, I appreciate it, but, I really, at the present moment, I haven't had a drink in like 3 years, okay? So, but the thing is, what is the most death-dealing drug in the United States and elsewhere around the world? What do you think it is? It ain't opium. It's not crack. It's not cannabis.
Nicotine.
It is nicotine and alcohol.
I was gonna say followed by that with the liver disease that's going on. But yeah,
alcohol and nicotine is not psychotropic. Okay, but the drug that kills more people per year than any other, all of them combined, is alcohol. So think about that before you start calling people junkies, and pookies, You know, with some guy, you know, recently called me a pookie as if it was some sort of, you know, derogatory term that I wouldn't shake off or couldn't shake off. It's laughable to me. But many of the same kind of demonization tactics that racists have used against us, we now use on ourselves. How ironic is that? But I'm gonna let you gentlemen take over again, man. Go ahead.
Also, real quick, shout out to MLR. I appreciate that, fam. Go ahead, Sandog.
No, so again, kind of back to where we are, and this is where now, and again, and this is where Gigi and I'm certain for you will jump in, because you know now when you get to the war on drugs, because remember there are other things at play. So you have you have several institutions that have been empowered by the federal government and actually globally, right? But in our case, by the federal government to deal with these people that are problematic. So the same way, the Red Scare, and J. Edgar Hoover would use that, to label people communists and use that as a reason to go after them. Now it's going to be drugs, right? So these groups or these people, what I'm saying, are now dealing in drugs, and so now you get the election of one Ronald Reagan, right? And when Ronald Reagan comes into play, you get what's under it. You get a series of new laws called the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of '84, right? And
Hey,
so,
Sandal, let me stop you real quick. MLR wants to know if you got a cash app. He wants to bless you, man. So.
oh man, no, man, I appreciate it, man, but nah, I don't. You know what I'm saying? No, I don't. Just man, said just pray my perm setting right.
Oh my God.
Yes, pray. You know what I'm saying? I'm split. I don't know if I want to dread my hair and fade it on the side like Killmonger going forward, or like I said, or look like Big Boy and AT Aliens. I'm somewhere. I'm stuck in the middle. You know what I'm saying?
I'm gonna keep quiet on that. I'm gonna let you.
Yes, but nah, man. So you get into the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of '84, right? And so the things that I wanted to pull out of it is you get what's called the Armed Career Criminal Act, right? Which ultimately is what they will have is the three strikes law, right? And so this will be tied to violent crimes and drug related. And then the funny part is that now with this is a minimum 15-year sentence, but it replaced the 10-year maximum of the older Gun Control Act, right? So
Sandal, let me interject here because you're at the right spot for it.
Yeah.
What's going on right now with Reagan at this very, very time period is the entire situation that's broken down with the Nicaraguan government and their attempt to take them down. And we need to understand that at this point, the Black Panther Party has effectively dissolved as we understand it as a political entity, as a socio-political entity. We're talking 81 through 84 at the moment. And what's left in its place are young bloods and community resistance and progress. I don't have to tell you what that stands for. You should already know. The most important thing to take away from this is the Black budget operations that were taking place to help fund these things under the table, because Congress only allotted for so much. And there was only so much said about it at the end of the day, because we need to remember there was still things going on with regards to trying to fight communism in the back door, particularly after we just faced a situation with Cuba and the violations of the Monroe Doctrine, which is really what's kicking this whole thing forward. If you want more resources, this right here is taken. Let me give you a link. I sent two. One that'll tell you about what Reagan was doing at this point in time, so you can see the motivation as to why there was money being set aside and why these two organizations were infiltrated to make that go down. And a long list of documentation here on this second link I just put from justice.gov, so you can track what's happening with regards to the CIA getting caught with their pants down with this mess. But go ahead, Sanddog.
Correct.
Yeah, but and one of the things I also want you to know, speaking to Nameless's point and Sanddog's, is that, it's easy to procure budgets and money to fight against people that are considered to be outgroup people. You know, the government will find a way to finance terrorizing, marginalizing, surveilling, and incarcerating people who they deem to be threats to, you know, domestic civility. Okay, and then not only that, you know, there's also a large amount of money apportioned to what is considered to be foreign threats. Okay, so it's a very easy way to siphon off money because the public, you know, they're already, I don't know if the average American is either stupid or they're just scared. But the objective is to get the public behind either, you know, supporting or endorsing money being allocated to fighting against foreign threats or domestic threats. Okay, and of course, outgroup people have always been perceived to be, especially black folks, have been perceived to be a domestic threat. But go ahead.
Yeah, because again, it's built on the idea that you know, that these people are here to take something from you, right? So it's it's painting the picture that these people are a threat to civility and progress. And back to your point, right? The powers of reasoning are not that very strong. And so you know, and this is, and like I said, and so this becomes a problem, right? So now they're playing, you know, they're playing with these older laws, right? Which now, for me, becomes very scary. You know, dealing with the United States government, because if you look at it, when we talked about the Reconstruction Amendments, right? And so the 14th Amendment is supposed to be the thing that makes everyone a citizen, so to speak, right? Everyone equal under the law. And funny enough, the 14th Amendment should be enough. And I don't understand why the American public has never questioned the fact that you have the 14th Amendment. Okay, if racism isn't a thing, why did you need, God knows what, 10 or more civil rights amendments? And that's probably maybe centering African Americans alone, let alone any other group. Why would you need multiple civil rights amendments to reinforce the 14th Amendment, right? And I think that's a real problem, or real question that has to be asked. And so I'm not saying to roll back these amendments, but it's a thing that, at least for me in my study of American history, that I find problematic with the country, is that, you know, when you talk about basic laws that should preserve human rights, that you have to have amendments on it because the public on the ground doesn't want to abide by them. Right?
And then I just put a link in the chat.
Yeah.
You can see what Sandtalk's talking about. The extensive list of adjustments and changes that had to be made just to say we're supposed to be treated like citizens and human beings, just so people understand how precarious this stuff is, and how at a moment's notice, all it takes is one set of folks in Congress to just slip up, and then just changes happen, and this goes out the window, and we're back to pre-1865.
But it's important to understand. See, a lot of people, especially black people, and it seems like in today's culture, there is a new segment of the black population emerging that are utilizing the same kind of talking points as racist white people. I understand that there's a lot of pathology and dysfunction in the black community. I get it. And you want to distance yourself from it. But the reality is that either through direct machination or through neglect, just, refusal to even deal with an issue or a problem, they've created the context out of which a great portion of this dysfunction arises. And that's all we're trying to do, is to point it out. And then a lot of people, the first thing they say is that slavery was so long ago. Well, we're not just talking about slavery, okay? We're talking about slavery. We're talking about Jim Crow. We're talking about ghettoization. We're talking about a massive protest against acknowledging the basic humanity of certain segments of the United States population. And these things are not done yet. They're not over. I mean, I just don't see what people don't see. I don't get what people don't get. The evidence of it is right in front of your face. Okay? So we're not just talking about 1865, a phenomena all of a sudden coming to a halt. Because then you have Jim Crow. And it's just as vicious and it's just as, vitriolic as slavery was. Okay? And then you get the Civil Rights Act. But of course, as we all know, you might have de jure desegregation laws. But what about de facto statuses and systems, which for the most part continue the same kind of cultural patterns and behavior that you've seen in the United States damn near since its inception? Okay? So that's what we're trying to disclose. That's what we're trying to talk about. It's not that, we want to make excuses for black immorality or dysfunction, or that, what we're trying to do is to say that immorality is acceptable. That's not what we're saying. But what we are saying is that there have been long and protracted policies and laws and, systems and institutional structures that have given rise to the kind of conditions that you see us in today. And if we can't think practically about this, I mean, like, if we're showing you laws, we're showing you policies, and you still say, who cares? It doesn't impact or it doesn't affect me. Okay, well then I don't even know what to tell you. Just go consume some comments or some content where it's a constant back and forth between men and women. Because if that's all you're here for, okay, cool. There's a place for that. But what we're trying to do is put bigger pieces of the puzzle together. Sandog, go ahead, bro.
Yeah, but again, and back to that point, right? The quote Frederick Douglass, and some of you guys have already seen it because I've inboxed it to you. But Frederick Douglass says the American people have this to learn: where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress them, rob and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe. Right? And so, with this understanding, in terms of what these two gentlemen said, where we got here, what you have to remember is that for everything that there is a cause and an effect. And although we're not on the plantation, what you're looking at is both the effects and effects of what has been done to us. And so it's sad and most unfortunately, we live in a society that doesn't want to take responsibility for those types of actions. So again, not even just with African Americans, right? When you hear about immigration and people showing up south of the border, which is a discussion for another time, right? You can also study America's dealings in Latin America, right? Which is pretty much why you have people that are come, because not everybody that crosses that border, or a lot of people that cross that border, aren't Mexicans. They're coming from other places, within Latin America, right? And so if you were to study our history there and the backyards that we played in there, you'd probably kind of get to see why you got people showing up at your front door, right now. And back to what we were saying in regards to laws, right? So now you're entering scary territory where you're talking about, dealing with drugs, and, the Armed Career Criminal Act has a minimum of 15 years, replacing what was a 10-year maximum under the Gun Control Act, right? And so now you're talking about having more stringent and more harsher laws, because remember now, African Americans, right, and certain left-wing groups are tied to this. But as we move further away, especially from the Vietnam War, pretty much it's going to be African Americans. And for the war on drugs, for me and where I lived, I had a front row seat on it, right? And so it will be African Americans, Latinos for us, which would be your Puerto Rican population, and then whatever lower income white people that were there. Now adding to this, you get to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, right? And so now what they quote unquote want to do is they want to harmonize federal penalties, right, for these types of crimes, be it drugs or violence or whatever. And so what happens is basically the judges now can no longer make their own determination, at least at a local level. They now have to kind of follow these guidelines sent down from the federal government. And so at this time, you're getting pushback because people are saying, man, this is congressional overreach, right? Because remember, we have three branches of government, right? Or checks and balances. So there's the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, right? And so people are pushing back and saying, okay, great, this is something that's coming down from the legislative side of our government, but there's nothing judicial. There's nothing judicial that oversees it, and this is not making any sense. So this is a overreach of one of the powers, that we have in government in regards to them, quote unquote, streamlining, what's going to happen to people, in the war on drugs when they have to go stand up in court and deal with the government, be it at local levels with their municipalities or federal, right? Another thing that it does is that it abolishes parole for federal prisoners convicted after November 1st, 1987. So shout out to slavery, anybody. So, so the game today is that you can't be born a slave, but you can be made one, right? So now you got to remember a side effect, off to the left, right? When you get arrested or you get locked up, what do? You lose your right to vote. You can't get student loans. Can't get a driver's license, right? You have this quote unquote record that's being used against you, right? So now you're looking at, from my perspective, what's more or less a modified black code system, right? So you quote unquote paid your debt to society, but you could never reintegrate into society because you don't have you're not given the tools by society to change your condition, right?
Now let me add a little bit to this so we can really bring this home so you can understand what's going on.
Yeah.
This is the emergence of what they call the for-profit prison system, the for-profit corrections agencies. There's one major one right now called Core Civic. I'll go ahead and throw a link so you can see the kind of money these institutions are bringing in right now. Throw this in the chat. The first one I'm going to put in is the larger one, Core Civic. Right now, they've got a total asset worth of 3.7 billion. They make a revenue of 1.9. That's after costs and all of that. 1.9 billion just in the United States. Just in the United States. They were founded in 83. What else was going on in 83? Shout out to Reagan. This crap was not a coincidence. They, especially with what happened with being able to form lobby groups and these super PACs to where money can now be utilized as a form of free speech. They're some of the biggest lobbyists in the political sphere. Everybody has to adhere to some of these super PACs, and they're one of them. There's another group, Geo. Put them in the chat too, so you guys can go take a look at their data. Quick link. Why? Geo, same deal. They make a they have a total asset as of 2021 of 4.5 billion.
And the backdrop for, the justification for this is, cutting down crime, eliminating crime. So being tough on people who have so-called habits, drug habits, which leads to immoral and violent behavior. Not the conditions of poverty itself, not unemployment, not marginalization and dislocation, but drugs. All of this at the same time that white people are using and dealing drugs more than any other population.
Yep.
I mean, they are aware of this. These people are not stupid. This is why I say you got a lot of white gaslighters out there. I just hate to say that, but it's the facts. How can you not, if you're a white person, and I've been to school, I've worked with many white people over my years, okay? And they will tell me their stories about how they've done mushrooms. I've never even seen a mushroom, okay? About how they've done ecstasy, or how they've dropped acid, or how they've done lines. I never considered using cocaine. Now, I am not gonna say that, back in the day when I was younger, that I didn't sell it. I did, okay? It was fucked up. I'll admit that, okay? However, I want you to consider it. The average white guy, he's more prone to be a dope head than any black person. But the poster child for drug use and abuse and drug dealing has become black folks. And I would hasten to add that the entertainment industry now has basically solidified the image of the black male as a drug dealer. It's almost like the lionization of this kind of image of black people using, this illicit trade. And given the context of the laws, the draconian laws that black folks have been subjected to related to this phenomena, it's amazing that you even have people like 50 Cent or Jay-Z. It's amazing. Okay? When these people know full damn well that they've been using drugs all along, but they support or endorse the war on drugs. This is the thing that, befuddles my brain. This is the thing that it fucks me up. So they have to know it. The average white guy has to know it. I'm talking about PhDs, JDs, I'm talking about MDs, okay? All who I, because I've worked with and associated with white people on, many different levels, okay? So they'll tell me, they'll come out and tell me. But nobody considers them to be junkies. But we consider ourselves to be junkies. We'll throw ourselves under the bus and say the most despicable things about each other for drug use. But, drugs permeate every area of our culture. The university, Wall Street, the white fraternities. Come on, man. But the first thing we'll do is we'll talk about each other. That's the first thing we'll do. So, I'm going to leave it over to y'all, man. I'm going to stop because I'll get on a soapbox. Go ahead.
Let me just say this real quick because I want to add some context to what I said just quickly. Understand that I'm not even talking about what's provided by the federal government. What I linked were the private institutions that do this on the low and compete for government contracts so that they can do it for a cheaper price than what would be actually done by the federal government. So let's say you've got a situation where per day, per whoever, one company saying they can do it for 300 a day. The government's saying 300 a day is the regular route. You'll have these organizations come in and say that they could do it for, 100. And then you got to wonder what kind of corners are being cut to provide that sort of ordeal and that sort of issue. And this is how you get such a dramatic difference with regards to the federal and then the private facilities that do the same thing. Followed on top of that, you also have a lot of these businesses. I don't know if you want to do this here, Gigi.
Yeah,
but all I'm going to say is those two organizations I just linked, let's just say they've got interesting relationships with institutions like Warner Brothers and very popular labels that people are very familiar with, especially around the 1980s. If you understand where I'm going, Gigi.
Man, speak on it, man. Like, say it explicitly. You don't have to,
Look, these folks got pockets that run way deep. There's a lot of business opportunities to help launch and make money off of this because they knew that there was a connection between putting certain music out that was promoting drugs, that was getting folks locked up. And then at the same time, these same business organizations came on the low, and just to spike the profit on what they're worth on the NASDAQ, they were able to use a correlation in the increase in music talking about these things, an increase in circulation of folks getting in prison, then folks having stuff on their record going back to prison, and they still keep aggregating funds in these organizations. There's a direct correlation to a lot of these record labels and these private institutions we're talking about, stacked on top of the fact that a lot of these individuals were able to make backdoor deals in more remote areas in the state and start funding more resources for other purposes because of the way the industrial college works. Because guess what happens when you are imprisoned in a particular area for a certain amount of time? You get to change your residency. And if you can artificially improve your population and increase it, sounds a lot like what they used the 3/5 compromise for in the first place. But now they can count you as a whole person. Slavery by another name, indeed. Go ahead, Sandog.
Facts, right? And so again, right, and shout out to the state of Kentucky, right? So after slavery, for starting convict leasing, right? So again, so now you're, and so the other fun part about it, right, is that you get into what's called civil forfeiture and equitable sharing. Right. And so for civil forfeiture, right, you're talking about, taking people's assets, right, because you're claiming this is what was used for the crime. So you can take somebody's home, you can take you can take their property, you could take their cars or whatever it is, right? And in some cases, right, you didn't even these guys didn't even have warrants when they did what they did, and then they would split it up. They would quote unquote split the booty between local and federal law enforcement agencies under equitable sharing. So if you quote unquote allegedly shook Sandog down, for $1 million, right, then the federal agency will take its cut out of it and the local agency will take its cut out of it. And so you can only imagine the type of corruption that came that came out of that, right? And so now, if you turn back the hands of time, or even till now, where you would have black people who would have certain levels of material success, and they would end up being pulled over. So if I see Gigi in 1988 in the Mercedes Benz, which again is not common, quote unquote, to see a black guy in a Mercedes Benz, I'm gonna pull him over, especially under whatever stop and frisk laws they had at the time. I could pull him over and then shake him down, right? To see if he's up to something, and if he appears nervous or fidgety, then that would be enough of a justification for me to proceed with harassing him, in order to, for the most part, unask him of his freedom or whatever property that he owns. So you get to there, and so now at this point, right between 80 and 84, the FBI drug enforcement budget goes from $8 million to $95 million. You know what I'm saying? So for
Big surprise.
Yeah, and for the people that are out there listening, right, again, you have to remember that you are the primary target for all of this. So one of the reasons why I'm holding back, because, again, we're talking about future programming. And so in the future programming, I'm going to explain to you guys the difference between a main effort, supporting effort, and subsequent efforts. And so this money that's being spent, right, these billions of dollars, these private prisons and everything else, this is money that's being spent on you. And for my friends out there, for so for my white brothers and sisters out there who are listening to this stuff, right? I remember when I was a kid and I would read, William Cooper, like, Behold the Pale Horse and all those kinds of books. And I was like, man, how the hell will we ever have militarized police and dudes dressed in black kicking in doors, and the American public doesn't see that coming. And basically, what I've come to find out is sad and most unfortunately, again, it's going to start with quote and unquote keeping black people and other dissidents in check. And then by the time it shows up for you, just like, with the Nazis, it'll be here to stay and there'll be nothing that you can do about it. So, so I just, for those of you who of other backgrounds, who are listening to this, I just want to let you know that pretty much this is how it all starts. When you talk about, getting to the end of liberty and freedom as we know it, right?
Yeah,
and so,
but one thing I want to, just going back to that quote that you made of Frederick Douglass, right? Could you repeat that?
Yeah, okay, hold on 1 second. I can repeat it. So for Frederick Douglass, he said, the American people have this to learn: where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe.
But that's true in so many different ways. And Martin Luther King Jr. would eventually come out and say something similar, but it was less detailed. But he said, a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Okay,
correct.
If you allow and permit for a militarized police force to attack Negroes, eventually that militarized police force is going to, through inertia, keep itself intact. There are people making money. They have jobs. They have retirements. They're not going to want to see that apparatus dry up and shrivel away, especially if there's an excuse for it, namely that we need to still put an end to the crime and put a curb on drug use. So you'll have a lot of zealots out there who don't want to see it end. And you can continuously keep the practice in motion by, drumming up fear and, having the public believe that if they don't support it, then it's going to destroy the fabric of society itself. And the funny thing about it is, and I always say, drugs in America are as ubiquitous as Coca-Cola and apple pie, man. And in fact, the active ingredient of Coca-Cola was cocaine.
Facts.
I mean, that puts a new spin on have a Coke and a smile. I mean, just imagine what it would be like to live in a world where, you could go get a Coca-Cola and it's filled with fucking cocaine. Can you imagine that? Well, in today's culture, you can't imagine it at all. But what you can imagine is going to a playoff game, whether it's baseball or football, and getting tons of alcohol, which is the drug that kills more people in the world than any of the other drugs combined. And you'll sit back and you'll hear people who are alcoholics, who drink regularly, denounce, stigmatize, and deride people who use these other drugs. I'm done. Go ahead, Sand Dog.
Right.
And I'm not giving sanction to drug use or pathology in any way. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to endorse, the proliferation of drug use. So if there's anybody out there who wants to make that claim, I'll readily deny it. I'm not making that claim. But what I am making in reference to a claim is that, look, trying to thwart and stymie and prevent it is a fool's errand. Drugs have been in the world since human civilization has been in the world. It was part of the ritual ceremonies of priests and inductees into manhood and warriorhood. You're never going to get rid of drugs. So this is a way to maintain a war under the pretense that if we don't attack it, it'll, become something that unravels the fabric of society itself. It's hysteria. Okay?
Correct.
And one of the before y'all say anything, I want to say this. And I tell students this. I say, look, if any of y'all want some weed, can you get it today? They all say yes. I say, if you want some cocaine, can you get it today? They all say yes. I say, if you want, it's not methamphetamine, but it's like the equivalent of methamphetamine, the shit, the pills these kids take to stay up all night so they can study and shit like that. Okay? I'm like, can you find these drugs readily? Are they readily available for you? They all say yes. So I'm like, well, what the fuck good is the war on drugs? What good is it? If the goal is to eliminate the proliferation and the readiness of drugs, then America's done a piss poor job at this shit. But I don't think they actually have ever wanted to stop the influx of drugs at all. I don't think that that's ever been a goal of the United States. I'm just going to keep it a buck. It might sound like some conspiracy shit, but shout out to the Iran-Contra affair. Yeah. Shout out to the Iran-Contra affair, man.
Well, again, right, it keeps jobs. So it goes back. What's the number that I'd have to go back and check, but it said the United States of America, since it's existed, has only known 31 years without war, right? So it goes to kind of tell you how it makes its money, or what's, or what's built into the money mechanism. And so, like I said, the issue of far left groups and black people, the reason why that would be a threat is because, again, it goes back to what the Nameless Protagonist says, right? If you were to, and my younger people say the same thing. If you were to either end racism or have reparations to change the status of black people, to bring them on equal footing with the rest of the country, you now fundamentally change the business model of the country. You have changed what America is, right? And so what does that look like, or how does that work? You know what I'm saying? Even, again, even on some levels, I can't guess. But you would fundamentally change how the country works. Because at the end of the day, man, look, what people don't understand is that when you're in the game, there are two drugs that's in the game. You got the user itself, but then also the dealer is addicted to that money, right? And you can't let that money go. So, when you look at the drug trade, man, good luck. You know what I'm saying? Having a guy that you locked up on RICO charges and then telling him when he gets out of prison, if he does get out, hey, go make it at McDonald's, right? Good luck. So at least from my perspective, America, like I said, America is in the same boat, right? That slave money, that exploitation of free labor or whatever, it's an addiction. It's an addiction that America herself can never shake. And since then, whether it be the black codes, Jim Crow, and everything that's done now, just like any junkie, she's trying to find her way back to that first high.
Now, let me say this too, because we need to understand the two shadow policies that are in place. There's one that's being offered to the white aggregate and one that's being directed towards the black aggregate. And remember, again, this is my subjective opinion, but this is how I see this when it comes down to the binary in America. Black is the shadow of white. If you don't have a definition of white, you don't get black. Now, I see that applied globally wherever we're dealing with racism, white supremacy. And as a result, there's going to be a running policy. And at the same time, we can see the nexus of this starting with the Nixon administration. It begins with the response to the Moynihan report right here, starting with this idea of benign neglect. I'll show you the actual letter that got sent from Moynihan to Nixon talking about it so you get the full context with nothing misconstrued. It's right there. It's a PDF. Please look at it when you get time. It starts on page 7. But the idea of benign neglect, to just have it as a policy to just pretend we don't exist and leave it alone as it pertains to official policy stating us by name. So this is where we get the codified language. At the same time, they have to do something about trying to gather more influence out of the poor whites that we've been talking about this entire time. And it culminates in an idea that, again, originates with the Nixon administration and is continued by Ronald Reagan through proxy, is the Southern strategy, both of which you can take a look at in these links right here. I need you guys to understand that this is setting the context under which these actions are going on. And they provide a kind of subterfuge or baseline under which the media is being platformed and projected out to hide these things and obfuscate, that's the word, what's taking place so that this can continue to move forward and continue to paint us as though we're the bad guys. It exploits this, I'm going to call it the principles of social dominance, order, and implicit bias and implicit association. It stirs the general fear of the white aggregate and in turn justifies policies that allow for them to extract and funnel more money into police forces and more money into legislation and legislative bodies and commissions that are going to continue to operate under the context of this, quote, war on crime, and provide even more influence towards the prison industrial complex as we've been describing in its lobbying effect. It becomes, in other words, the new political meta, going from there all the way up into what we see in 96 with Clinton's influence with regards to it. Go ahead, Sandog.
But hold on, before Sandog begins to speak again, I want to encourage, I think the last time we were on, when I ended the stream, we had like a short or a brief discussion after, and I suggested that you read this book. And the book is called Democracy Incorporated. I don't know if you had the opportunity to take a look at it. It's written by an author by the name of Sheldon Wolin, okay? I think he was a Harvard professor, but I'm not quite certain. I know he's an Ivy League professor. And he wrote this book, and he's a great political scientist / philosopher. What he does is he basically pinpoints the origin of policy and political trajectories, okay? And one of the things he does is he demonstrates that contemporarily, much of the catalyst and the justification for the policies that we have in terms of law enforcement, especially intelligence agencies and shit like that, can all be centered around the Cold War, okay? But once you get the Cold War going, it becomes an excuse to monitor and to surveil black people, Mexicans, Chinese, Indians, any group that might be considered to be a domestic threat, okay? But once you drum up the public with fear-mongering, okay, for the most part, they'll give up any of their basic rights. I mean, you've seen it. You've seen this. The Patriot Act in and of itself is a fear-mongering act. Now, yeah, did something terrible happen on September 11th? Yes, it did. I'm not discounting the horror of that event. And I'm not saying it's justified, okay, for the event to have occurred. So I don't want anyone to make that claim and to say that I was glad that it happened, okay? However, what happened subsequently after 9/11?
Right, we got the Patriot Act. Right, go ahead.
Now citizens are like, it's okay for, me to be searched. And, when I go to the airport, and I just want you to think about this as a matter of practicality, okay? If you're a terrorist cell or a group in the United States, are you going to do the same thing in the same space in the same way that you did it initially? You're not going to do that. Okay, this is not the only, like the aircraft industry or the flight industry is not the only means by which to engage in a terroristic act. Okay? You got hundreds of thousands of people who travel on the rail system every day. The same with the busing industry every day. You have a large amount of people who congregate in public spaces. If a terrorist wanted to do something, how do you stop something like that? I'm not saying that intelligence, doesn't exist to where they can, to somehow prevent it to some degree. But I mean, for crying out loud, man, Americans will give up their rights for the right reason. Okay? Or if they feel that there's a reason that justifies the infringement of their rights. All I know is I can recall going to the airport as a child and taking toy guns to the airport. And nobody even like giving a shit. You know, I remember going to the airport where you didn't have to take off your clothes because it seems like now you got to get strip searched before you get on the airplane.
And felt up. But just for the record, I've been dealing with politics and vision from Sheldon. So this has been a work, but it's been gems everywhere in this book. The book you mentioned.
Politics and vision is the truth.
Yeah, I'm dealing with politics and vision now, but the one you mentioned prior, I'll be getting into that after this because the version I got was the old one and his updated content. So it's even bigger.
But the great thing about Sheldon Wolin, and especially the book Democracy Incorporated, is that he begins to draw a connection between the corporate structure of the United States and the government structure and how the two have become merged. Okay? Yeah. And it's a new phenomena that did not exist prior to this Cold War situation, because the country could have gone, it could have taken a different trajectory. So we could have become a nation more like Europe, so to speak, that dealt more with social programs and development programs. We could have done that, but we decided to forego that in order to become the policemen of the world. I mean, we went on an empire campaign. It just is what it is. And then the question is, like, how much does it cost to maintain an empire? How much does it cost to be the police person of the world? And what does America gain from becoming the policeman of the world? Or what does the average citizen gain in reference to being the policeman of the world? But like this weird connection between corporations and government, just think about it. At the current moment, most people would believe if you're able to run a business, you're able to run government. That's the argument that people will make. Well, what gives me the expertise to be in politics? Well, because I know how to operate a business.
Yeah. Well, that comes from rhetoric from my political party, right? Because if you go back into the 80s and especially through the 90s, right? So remember, in the Clinton administration, there was a surplus, right? And that was because there were regulations. And so there was push, especially from the right in regards to deregulation, right? All the argument that government is inefficient, business knows better, the market is self-correcting, and then, the rest is history from there.
But one thing I want to underscore, and then I'm going to let you take over, and I swear I'm going to stop talking. I just want you to think about this for a second, though, and all the people out there listening. The market is based upon private activity in which you do what is best only for you. That's the way you're supposed to engage the market, okay? How can I find a malallocation in the market and exploit it such that I could, through efficiency and productivity, make a profit for myself? Or if I'm a corporation, for my shareholders. That's the goal of a corporation, okay? Then you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of government in and of itself, right? Or what's the point of politics? The two goals of the goals of a corporation should not be the same as the goals of a governmental structure, because a governmental structure is supposed to work in behalf of the best interest of a multiplicity of persons, not just for what's best for one person or a contingency of persons. It's not about necessarily efficiency. I want you to think about this. The system of checks and balances in the United States was supposed to be inefficient for a reason, right? To make things difficult, right? Such that, one group or one, branch of government doesn't overpower the other. They wanted this equilibrium, so to speak. But the kind of thinking that you utilize in business should not overlap into the kind of thinking that you utilize when you engage in work that's supposed to work to the public benefit. The values are different. The norms ought to be different. But what has happened in America is you've seen this coalescence of the market and of the public forum. And quite frankly, on America's watch, we're seeing it happen in real time, and it's not pretty. And the last thing, I'm hearing people right now talk about corporations in such a way in which they're willing to allow a corporation to do what they would never give sanction to the government to do, like to prevent you from being able to say what you want to say. Okay? You're beginning to see it everywhere. Okay? This person says something that we didn't like. They don't match up to our values. Therefore, we have to cut them off. Okay? That's a form of censorship, if you ask me. What's happened to Kyrie Irving? What happened to Tiffany Cross? What's happened to Dave Chappelle? I mean, a host of other people, okay? Now, it's one thing to come out and just be blatantly hateful, okay? It's another thing to have a difference of opinion that doesn't match up to what's politically correct, okay? But now, I'm hearing even black people say, well, you know, if it don't make money, well, you know, they can cut it off. You know, they can work somewhere else. And, you know, my thought process about it is this. In America, how do you secure your retirement? How do you do it? It's connected through your employment. How do you get access to health care? It's connected through your employment. Now, other countries throughout the West have a different kind of system to where everything is not contingent upon whether or not you're employed, okay? I just want you to think about it and consider it. I know right now, you know, habitually we've been kind of tacitly forced to agree with this kind of system, but it's not determined that it should be this way, okay? And if you feel that it's wrong for the government to infringe your speech, why would you allow for a corporation to do the same thing? Why do you think that the only entities that can curb or curtail your ability to be free is the government? It's not just the government. And now you're seeing this strange fusion between government and corporations. They're just doing the same shit through corporations now. So
isn't that the definition of corporatocracy? By definition, technically?
For the most part.
Yeah, we're seeing a soft corporatocracy, which is, again, it's in alignment with, again, my subjective opinion that prior to 1865, the United States was nothing more than a federal corporatocracy. And it used the state system to participate in this idea of America. That's why you have the concept of the union. And when we introduced capitalism as its financial model, it used slavery as its foundation and its bare bones skeleton to roll it out. And ever since then, we've got the idea of American citizen being much more and employed much more like a worker that is born into that position. And it literally plays out the same way. It's like you're an employee and you form these unions to try to petition against the government for rights that you're supposed to be entitled to. It's like this weird shift where even when you look at I'm going to call it the colonial model, it's as though they're glorified contractors that were coming over trying to get land so that they could work for the corporation known as whatever state that they're a part of. Like, this is really baked into the bare bones skeleton of America as we understand it. And as we get into this fourth industrial wave, it's really picking up and exploiting the momentum of this that was established in the early 19th and 20th century. Maybe that's another conversation for
that's another. I took us here, but I took us here. I took us here.
Yeah.
Only to demonstrate that we got to be careful about what we permit and what we allow for, and about how we regard black people, even if we consider the black people to be those that we don't support. Okay, because. And a lot of people, I caught a lot of flack for saying that it was wrong that Tiffany Cross got fired. A lot of people were happy about it. Like, okay, that's one gynocrat that we don't have to listen to.
Missing the bigger picture.
But don't cut your nose off to spite your face, is what I'm saying. if it's the case that a corporation can fire you for a tweet, it's no strange surprise why black men in the manosphere are using fucking icons instead of showing their real faces.
At the end of
Think about it. Right now we exist in a culture where the First Amendment is being able to say what you want to say in a political or in a public forum where, you know, there's no fear that you'll be imprisoned or that you'll be ostracized or exiled. I mean, right now, I don't see that taking place. Not that it's ever actually been free where everyone can say what they want to say without fear or threat, but for crying out loud, we've created another kind of set of conditions which make it impossible for us to be like a responsible, enlightened public. But anyway, man,
what goes around comes around. I think is the message I want to really emphasize with this digression, because people get very comfortable that just because it's happening to us, they think that it can't happen to them, and they will very quickly realize they're sorely mistaken. Which is why I wanted to put forward that benign neglect in this Southern strategy, as again contextualized as an obfuscation of the real agenda going on at the end of the day.
Well, go ahead, my brother, man. Go ahead.
Again, to shout out to Benjamin Franklin, right? Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Benjamin Franklin.
Yep.
And you know, I did a show on this, man. I talked about there's a philosopher. His name is Ronald Dworkin, right? And I think the book that he wrote was Taking Rights Seriously. And one of the things he said is, okay, you can either look at an infringement of a right as the inflation of a public good, because that's what the whole concept of I need to infringe a right in order to create a utilitarian good. I mean, that's the only support that you could get for it. And oftentimes fear is the catalyst for people giving up their rights. But once you go down that path, it becomes a slippery slope. And a lot of people now are settled, you know, through the virtue and the politically correct culture that we have, you know, the signaling, the virtue signaling, the grandstanding, and, you know, the drawing upon the idea of hurting people. Like, did you see the Kyrie Irving interview? Did you see that shit?
Man,
I've never seen anything like that in America, bruh. Never. And I especially thought I would never see something like that happen to a black person in America, to where a tweet of a documentary in which no discussion of the merits of the video, no discussion of the context of the video has ever been made or discussed. It's just that one group, an anti-hate group, the ADL, just came out and said this is quote unquote anti-Semitic. That's enough for everybody to say, you need to apologize. You need to pay a fine. Or you need to be suspended. You just better watch it, man. Like this country is becoming...
And they don't challenge Amazon at that.
They say nothing to Jeff Bezos. Not a fucking word. I have not heard... One thing's for certain. White folks ain't giving up their Amazon. They don't give a fuck if Bezos says it. They just care about if Kyrie said it.
What should tell you all you need to know about this.
So yeah, Sandal, keep on, man. Let's not get too far off track, bro.
Yeah, but again, it just goes back to what I said. So for a lot of you out there who's wondering where a New World Order is going to come from, right? Again, just so thank your local Negroes, Arabs, Chicanos, and you know, and all the fear mongering, you know, that the government has placed on these people, that for the most part the public has swallowed and ran with, right? So that's one. And so now, right, to your point, now you get to it, Reagan, right? So instead of kind of taking an approach of, you know, let's let's look at the root cause of why people are doing drugs, maybe economic reasons, coming back from war, whatever. Reagan decides to criminalize drug use, right? And so this is something dangerous. Back to what Gigi said. This is something that has been around since the dawn of time. And more than likely in our societies, if people are using drugs in a modern sense or society, then more than likely they're looking to escape some kind of pressure, right? Be it, and in many times, this pressure is economic. And so you're spending hundreds of millions, billions, now up to trillions of dollars, right? To quote and unquote, keep these people in check, so to speak, when all the money that you're spending could have actually solved the root problems as to why people will want to use this stuff in the first place, especially, like I said, especially amongst African Americans. Because again, to your point, I don't believe that for African Americans, there's a real appetite, for for hard drugs for them to use. And so, we know that it impacted these communities. And so now, shout out to the sentencing. So when you get the sentencing, the disparities for sentencing were 100 to 1, right, in that ratio. So again, Gestapo, New World Order, here we come. So if you have 5 grams of crack, that was a minimum of 5 years. And if you have 500 grams of cocaine, it was the same sentence, right? So make that make sense, to have 100 to 1 disparity. And, again, and for the most part, that's just okay with the rest of the country, right? Now you are in real, like this thing that we call racism, man, this is a real problem on many levels. Gigi and Nameless were talking about corporations or, a corporatocracy, the United States being ran by such, but I would argue from my perspective that America signed on for this when you couldn't let slavery go. So from Sandog's perspective of economics and history is that when the Republican Party smoothed up to the planter class after slavery, for the most part, or the fact that chattel slavery happened, but after slavery, the fact that the planter class got smoothed up on, by moderate conservative Republicans and Democrats, that at least from my perspective, that would pave the way into you having what we have now, because you will go from that plantation to black people on that plantation, and then after that, sharecropping, caught up in the penal system, and then you would have white people getting locked in factories. So I would like to think that for America, once those people got locked in factories, or you found yourself burning matches between your fingers to stay awake so you can work, and you got children dying operating heavy equipment or in coal mines, I would like to think that for America that would have been a wake-up call. But
it was. There was, for a brief period of time, there was a wake-up call. It's called FDR's New Deal and the Works program. And, the construction of like the Niagara Falls Dam and, just like public parks and recreation areas all over the country. You did start to see the country move in that direction, especially directly after the Great Depression and the trust busting that took place, to the robber barons.
Yeah, but I'm talking about in terms of a consciousness of the detriment. So again, because you got to remember, at least for me, and you can correct me if you believe that I'm wrong, is that again, racism will be the catalyst that will open up the door for all of this stuff.
Oh, for sure. Like, I'm not disagreeing with you wholeheartedly. All I'm saying is, at one brief period, you had what could have been a movement towards something different than the model we have. But directly after America's withdrawal I won't say withdrawal, but their victory of World War II, you started to see a new kind of policy be implemented, okay? So they moved away from domestic investment and they began to develop what Eisenhower would call the military-industrial complex, okay? And so this is the direction we've been going in, and it's been this way for like decades. And the question is why? Well, I mean, people who have money and power, they're going to try to find a way to get what they had back. If there's a movement in a different direction and to them it hurts their bottom line or it seems to threaten the quality of their life, they're going to, at any opportunity, if it's open, I mean, it's like a double Dutch rope, man. Yeah. Okay, the motherfucker, is now my time to jump in. Something changed. Let's get it back how it was. Let's get back to where we were. And so this is what you see. Okay? All I can say is Americans, man, got to, they got to think more critically, and they have to be a tad bit more vigilant in understanding, their place in the world. There's a lot of videos that and books that I've suggested that people take a look at, but right now I think one of y'all put a chart up here. I'm gonna add that to the stream so Nameless Protagonist could give us a breakdown of what this shit here is all about. We've been talking about thus far.
So this right here is taken from the FBI census here, and this is just supporting everything we're talking about here. If we look at it's comparing black and white, it says at the state level, blacks are about 6.5 times as likely as whites to be incarcerated for drug-related crimes. 6.5. If you look at the actual usage of drugs, we're actually less than white folks. We don't, and this is what Gigi been saying, we don't use them as much as they do. We don't. We also make up damn near 50%. Just the way I showed you earlier with the chart in 96 that was sent to the FBI, and this was in Maryland. Same scenario happening out there, and we already know there's a massive black population out there. But the important thing here is look at the rate of selling. It's negligible, the difference between the two. Negligible. But the key...
One thing, just understand this though, right? We're talking about percentage of population, correct?
We are 13%.
So look, if we're 13% of the population, you have to factor into account that there's more of them. So in terms of just mere volume alone, there's more opportunities for white people to be arrested for selling drugs. Or am I mistaking something here? Like no. if they say percentage of people who sell drugs, and it's about the same, that means that they're selling drugs because black people are 13% of the population, right? Yep. Okay. Most of the drug dealers
that in half for the
6
fact that,
black males,
right?
Okay,
right, because that's who's being targeted. But go ahead.
30% of the population are white males, correct, or somewhere around about,
around
right?
30%, right?
So there you got your 6%. So they're selling drugs. There's a 30% greater chance that you could find a white person selling drugs than there is a black person selling drugs. But in the end, we're 6.5 times as likely as whites to be incarcerated for drug-related crimes. And then you say, well, racism doesn't exist. Well, then if they're using and dealing drugs at the same or at higher rates, and it's more of them, how are we? Let me get
to the purple section here, because this is where it gets disrespectful, and this is where people lose me about the black on black crime and all this other bullshit. This is where they lose me with this, because when you look at the rate at which we are actually, 1, arrested, 2, incarcerated at a state and federal level, the numbers don't add up. They don't add up. We are literally almost 3 times more likely. Sorry. Technically 6. But take a look at this purple portion right here. That's black. That's white. Drug-related arrest. Are you freaking kidding me? Then we get to drug-related incarceration, because just because you're arrested don't mean you're actually getting, sentenced or whatever. Here we are at the state level. Still, we mountain over the white arrests right here. Same thing going to the federal level. Mountain over white incarceration rates. You can't tell me something's not going on. This is what we mean by power. This is what we mean by systematic. This doesn't have to do with anybody's feelings. It's got nothing to do with somebody being called a particular name. This is a systematic continuation of the plantation through the 13th Amendment because of that exception that's written there. I want you to take a look at that. The exception of the 13th Amendment, which was what ended slavery, is what? At the rate of your being incarcerated.
Yes.
For whatever reason.
Yeah.
This is the hustle.
Yeah.
This is the hustle.
So when we talk about things like this, the first thing we'll do is we'll say, well, you wouldn't be arrested if you weren't doing no dope.
Bullshit.
Look, I don't care, if black people were the biggest junkies on the planet. Just because we're only 13% of the population, including male and female, these numbers shouldn't exist the way they do. But we're not the biggest junkies. I mean, the white boys are the biggest junkies. I mean, I'm not trying to be ignorant, and white women as well, because drugs don't discriminate. Men and women use them for the most part damn near equally, okay? But I'm pretty sure that men tip the balance a little bit more than women. But for crying out loud, we use and sell drugs of similar race, but we're more likely to be incarcerated for it. And most black people in this space will say, well, fuck Pookie. I don't care about Pookie. I don't lock his ass up. I just don't get the logic. And let me just say this. And let me just say this for the record, right? I heard some guy on one show, I'm not going to say the name of the show, but I heard the guy say race is not a factor in this culture. It's about your willingness to work. I did all the right things. Why should I get penalized for what you Pookie niggas doing? That's the language that I heard, okay? And my answer to that is, come on, fam. Like, what is remarkable about not doing the wrong thing? What's remarkable about that? What's so fucking supererogatory about not doing the wrong thing? I don't understand it. Like, it's not as if you're a forward-thinking leader. It's not as if you're a billionaire like Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs or fucking Forbes. It's not like you out here doing something super dynamic that nobody is able to avoid paying attention to you. You're just a regular ass motherfucker going to work. But then you'll take your ability to go back and forth and work on their plantation, which is what we actually do. Like, it's a fact. We go, we get educated, and we work at their jobs, or we start a business, and we try to get interconnected with their system. We're not fully let in because they have the capital and the resources and the infrastructure. We get in where we fit in, and then we start shitting on everybody else that it doesn't fit in where we are. And then we call ourselves hyper-productive, whereas everybody else is anti-productive. And then we start patting ourselves on the back or either stroking our phalluses. Like everybody should listen to us. I just don't understand the sentiment. I don't get it. Then you get met with hostility. And, my response to hostility is, how do you want it? You really don't want to see my hands. Yeah, I'm just being honest. You really don't.
Yeah, but you have to remember, and this is something that I'll talk about in the future, right? To talk about psychological warfare and the different forms of psychological warfare, right? So even when you go back into the liberal arts, right? Remember, one of the several liberal arts, aside from math and science, was rhetoric, right? And so there's a way. So again, there's ways that psychological warfare or propaganda or certain types are used. Like I said, are used. And what you have to remember is back to what we were discussing before, right? We don't have, we haven't been allowed or given the ability to establish institutions that challenge that. So think about it. Even when you go into one of your previous shows, when you talk about young men and same-sex education, right? All of these things are things that will challenge the system. So if you start to get young men, or especially young black boys, who have gone through same-sex education, you get a couple of generations of those guys, right? Then you may no longer have black men or even other groups of men signing up for intersectionalism or other types of values, right? Because it changes. So these people understand these outcomes, and it's just like I said before. So since we don't have those institutions, you're going to get many of us that's going to have that. That's what integration is. And so you're going to get many of us that's going to have this outlook. So when you look at civil rights, and again, the demonization of it, right? So now you get to black people, crack babies, welfare queen, all of this other stuff, right? So again, if anybody were to simply open up a history book and an economics book, right? And a psychology book, just those three things, right? You could kind of go from 16 whatever up until modern day and have a basic understanding of what's happening with African Americans. But that's not what most people do. Most people do not sit, they don't read, right? And so again, we all know the byproducts that comes with reading. And one of the byproducts that comes with reading is critical thinking, right? So if you have people who aren't doing that, then they're going to be made subject to whatever comes on television. Remember, even if you go back into earlier times in American history, just for plain advertisements, they had to pass laws because you had advertisements for the most part that qualified as damn hypnosis to get you to buy a product, right? Based upon, so remember, like, okay, you're watching your favorite TV show, right? I'm Green Gorilla. I'm at home, watching Magnum PI, wanting to grow that mustache. And then when it goes to commercial, all of a sudden, for some strange reason, the volume is sky high, right? I'm watching Magnum at 5 on my volume, but when it goes to commercial and it's time for me to buy Pac-Man cereal, the volume is at 8, 9, or 10. And there were all reasons for that type of thing, right? And so, it goes back to what I would tell, what I would tell anybody, and I will definitely say it in closing, right, is that you're not dealing in flesh and blood, right? But like I said, but in principalities. So people coming out and functioning the way they are and doing the things that they're doing, it all stems from the fact that, sad and most unfortunately, right, you're living in a society where critical thinking is dying. So remember what I told you, like rhetoric, right? Because rhetoric is not something that's necessarily based in fact. So when you had a lot of anti-education rhetoric going around and people were talking about, well, what use do we have for philosophy and psychology degrees? And I was like, and I'm talking to my friends, and I think I even talked, and I was like, that's the most goofiest shit that I ever heard. So you're telling me that philosophy degrees have no place, so therefore Aristotle, Socrates, Descartes, etc., we don't need to reflect or study and learn the things that will bring our society about. Make that damn make sense, right? But again, shout out to the planter class and everything else. You're now living in a world that's pretty much anti-intellectual. So what people are starting to say is that if it doesn't generate profit, it's not worth my time, right? So critical thinking is not worth my time unless critical thinking is done in a way that helps me to generate profit. Whether, okay, it's critical thinking that allows me to develop the Toyota supply chain system, right? Or the just-in-time, just-in-time logistics, things that cut costs or allow me to maximize the utility of profit. These are the things that's going to be considered genius in the future. And that's where it becomes scary for society all the way around.
So let me say this, and I got this chart up for a reason.
Yeah.
I want you to take a look at this, even though the numbers have gone down. I want you to realize that even with all of this going down, there's more of us imprisoned than there are white people. And what they're making notice of is the fact that the quote gap is starting to close now. And there's still more of us in prison than them. I really want this to be driven home, that when you take all of the prisoners in America that are female, for example, and combine them, there are more black men in prison than all women combined in the continental US. And it would take the addition of China, Russia, and Oceania as an aggregate to begin to make up the numbers of black men that are in prison just in the United States alone. Just in the United States. I really want that point to be driven home. Here's a link. Globally, there's 70,000 as of now. And I'm pretty sure they're counting everybody of women around planet Earth combined, 70,000. At one point in time, we're almost 600,000. Just black men arrested in America. And that was in 2007.
And you
almost
gotta think
600K.
You got to understand the black population is what?
13, and it's 6% of us because it's men. I'm talking about black men specifically.
Oh, for sure. But you got to look at the numbers, right? So there's 40 million men. Well, not men, but black people somewhere around, right? The numbers, right? But black men only make up what? How much percentage of the entire black population? Probably 6% or something like that, 6%, right?
Roughly, yeah.
So 6% of 40 million is how many?
Do the math on that.
6 times 4, 2.4 million or some shit like that, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if that's the case, how can damn near 600,000 to 500,000 of us be fucking locked up in prison?
And they're going to tell us slavery's over. I can't.
Then,
I can't.
But that's the thing, right? Because these are older figures, right? So we will make up at a time 35% of drug arrests, 55% of convictions, and 74% of convictions through possession. And so even during stop and frisk in New York City, right? You had about 600,000. You had about 600,000 people getting shook down by stopping, like not about 600,000 times, right? And the funny part is about 300,000 black people or men, 300,000 black men or less actually live in New York City. So you're talking about being stopped and harassed by police probably 2.5 times more than what your actual population is. And then the arrests that came from it were minimal.
Don't forget about the incentives that were created by the police chiefs for them to actually do that stuff because it was directly linked towards their promotions and other metrics.
Correct. Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, the only thing I don't like about this is, the conservative black stance on, the justification for this, because a lot of them will say, well, it doesn't impact or affect me. So I'm better than the rest of you, you druggies or whatever the case may be. I'm better than you guys because I haven't been ensnared in this net. And their opinion is, lock them up. And the one thing, like me and Marcus talked about this the other day, keep it 100, like you only got one team in America. You think these people will fuck with you, they'll fuck with you for a minute for whatever utilitarian reason they have, okay? But bruh, we all we got, to be quite honest. And you got to use the team you have. You can't pick a team. You know what I'm saying? It's like you can't decide, okay, I want a better team. No, this is what you got.
But Gigi, a lot of people are not knowledgeable. So here's the thing, right?
They're knowledgeable.
You
I don't like the idea of all these people just dumb.
No, but you can't. I'm gonna be. I get what you're trying to say, but what happens is like, for example, for you and I, right? You and I grew up, and Nameless also, right? We grew up around Pan-Africanism, conscious community, and all of that other kind of stuff. When I left where I grew up in New York City and went to school in Alabama, it was the complete opposite. Like the stuff that the three of us or the brothers in the chat consider the bare basics of Black history, you be shocked.
Let me show you something, man. I'm gonna show it real quick. Hopefully, I don't get a strike for it, because recently they've been real hard on your boy, like watching me, real criticizingly. But I wanna show this if I can. This is how Black people still think. You can't get past it.
Fair use, fair use.
Which doll is the black doll? And which one is the white doll?
That one.
Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? And which doll is the bad doll? And why is that doll pretty?
Because he's white and he has 2 eyes.
Which doll is the ugly doll? Why is that doll ugly?
Because he's black.
Which doll looks most like you?
Like me.
Yeah, which one looks like you?
And that one.
Okay.
That doll.
And folks gonna sit here and pretend like we don't have no kind of associative bias and in-group, out-group issues going on where we don't even identify as our own in-group.
Yeah.
I can't.
So but that would be, you know what I'm saying? But that would be, you know what I'm saying? That would be the thing, right? And so again, so Adrian Thomas, then you would know who I am. Right? Because again, I was one of the people that I was in that group, and I was one of the people that helped to establish it there on that campus, and probably starting in 1995, right? And so this is, you know what I'm saying, this is what we're talking about. You're talking about psychological warfare. Remember what I told you, that so now, what did I tell you guys before? So when we talk about like women, right? When people talk about that disdain that exists,
that low level resentment,
that low level disdain,
right?
And I told you that is the consequences of not having your own state. So when a girl is born in Nigeria, Guatemala, or whatever, good, bad, or indifferent, right? That state could be a world power, or it could be tore from the floor up. But what those women do know is that, hey, when I slide out of my mother's womb, the policeman on the street, the guy that collects the trash, and the president of that country looks like my father, right? So that is something that makes a complete difference. Whereas in the United States, when you slide out of your mother's womb, right, your dad or his phenotype is not in charge. It's something else. It's a completely different standard, and that standard is something that is hostile towards you. So the way that some of the women behave and the way that these children function are a byproduct of that, because it's a consequence. There's a clear difference between freedom and acceptance, right? So if you're in a bad or horrible relationship, right? If you're in a bad or horrible relationship, the way that you end that relationship is not by negotiating with it, right? Or whatever. You try to work things out, things don't work out. Then at that point, right, you put on your Timberland boots and you walk out the door, right? So I was once in a relationship where the other person, they could argue with me until the cows come home, and we would still be doing it today. And the most powerful thing I did was lace up my boots, took all of my trinkets and belongings, right? I took my Xbox, right, and my comic book collection, and I headed for the hills, and and pretty much that's what I did since. And so I think, at least, like I said, at least from my perspective, all of those things you're seeing are the consequences of not having your own state. Like if you were ever to meet people from Nigeria, right? Again, Nigeria has its problems, but if you met many Nigerians, right, a lot of them are highly arrogant, right? Because for good, bad, or indifferent, there's a level of pride in who they are and their own state. And so I think, at least for me, right, I believe for us that everything that you show is a byproduct of not having such.
And not only that, you wonder why the black homicide rate for black men is so high. I would go back to the dial test. We see ourselves as ignorant and evil. And, if given the opportunity, we'd probably just end up killing ourselves, man. Not that I would like the outcome, but the outcome is we've been deeply conditioned to believe that we're inferior. Yeah. And that, there's a caste system amongst black people. You got, intelligent, hardworking blacks, and then you got pookies and shit like that. As if, it's a matter of birth alone that determines, your trajectory. Almost like Calvinism amongst, even members of the Black Manosphere. I'm like, what the fuck is this? I don't understand it. And I mean, it's not as if these guys are like, multi-billionaires or millionaires or like statesmen or anything like that. It's just regular ass dudes. And even if they got a business making money, dude, you ain't out here balling out of fucking control like that to where you can denounce all Negroes who ain't at your level. What type of shit is this? I don't quite get it. And I just say it goes back to me. It goes back to the dial test. Negroes have a deep, low-level hatred for each other. And my suggestion is, even when they look in the mirror, they see somebody they hate. But I avoided that shit because, like you saying, dog, I don't know about you, Nameless, Protagonist, but my father, man, was like, hey, here's Frederick Douglass and his autobiography. Read the shit. You know what I'm saying? Like I would, be forced to sit down and read it. Or go ahead.
My dad went to school out there near where the Panthers formed, and he was part of one of the chapters. My mom very much so supported them as well growing up. So I got a healthy dose of that, and it helped a lot to set a little bit of my context growing up in the DMV and my affiliation with a lot of organizations out there. I said some things in the chat. Again, folks who know. We'll just say there's some folks that put in work that aren't necessarily tied to schools and whatnot that are about that. It's how you get a lot of minds that were out there working, like Dr. Neely Fuller and Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing. There were many different organizations that were coming in and out of there thanks to Howard University. And we'll just say for a very long period of time, I was inundated in that, which is why it really pains me to see what's gone on with regards to intersectionalism's infiltration and hijacking of the Black Power movement, all under everybody's noses before we could come to terms with this word gynocracy.
But it's important for people to understand how all of this occurred, okay? First of all, like Sandog said, it's exactly true. If you don't control the institutions, you don't control the trajectory in which, the institution is going to move.
You're multiplying by zero.
So black folks, like one of the first places where black folks established a black studies program was San Francisco. Okay? The Black Panthers or some pro-black national group ran up into the administration. They ran into those buildings and demanded that they have access to education about their own history.
Yep.
And to develop a place where they could, plot out their own politics. And then slowly but surely, because you got to think, I don't know if you know how the university structure works, but you have a president, vice president, you have a provost, maybe a chancellor, you have various departments within a university system. So you have a dean over one specific school. It might be the arts and the sciences. You might have a whole nother college or a university within the structure of that university system, right? So you might have a business school. It has a dean. Might have a social work school. It has a dean, okay? Then you have various faculty members within the department, okay? Or within the school. And so in arts and sciences, you might have an English department, and you might have a history department or a philosophy department or a social studies department. So I'm just breaking down the hierarchical structure, right? For you to get hired at a university, you're not necessarily being hired just by one individual. You got to meet the whole hierarchical structure. Okay, so you might not have to meet the president, but you definitely got to meet the provost. Okay, and you got to sit there and talk to them and explain to them why you deserve the job. You definitely got to meet the dean of the college, that you're going to be hired into. You're definitely going to meet the dean if you don't meet the provost, okay? You got to meet all the faculty, students, all kind of shit. Now, we already know the university system is predominantly white, especially at state schools, okay, that aren't historically black. And even in some cases, at historically black colleges and universities, the faculty is predominantly white. It's just a fact, okay? So if you get to determine who comes in to teach African American studies, you don't have an interest in having a bunch of radical black people at the university. You can pick people who have a more, a similar assimilationist viewpoint, or who are more liberal in the way that they think and less radical in the way that they think. Okay, like Howard University. No disrespect to Howard, man. You got to respect it as an institution over the annals of time. But in terms of the current faculty,
man,
I mean, and the kind of, the ideology that they profess, you gotta scratch your head and say, what the fuck happened? And I'm gonna tell you what happened. Slowly but surely, you had a whole bunch of integrationists and assimilationists who came into African American studies departments, and then they became more queer. And not to say that there's anything wrong innately with queerness. I mean, if that's what you want to do, that's cool. Okay, because I think that James Baldwin is a hell of a black, thinker. I think Bayard Rustin was a hell of a guy. Okay, so I'm not trying to exclude and marginalize the contribution of black queer people who have done some real, grassroots work. But like today, I don't see even queer people doing that grassroots work anymore. I see them demonizing other segments of the black population, as per the request of white women. The ethos of white women is the ethos that dominates the university system. It just is what it is. People who get hired are people who make white women feel comfortable. It is what it is. That's just the way that it is. And they're the predominant demographic at the university. They might not be the dominant demographic in the top positions, but increasingly that's becoming the case. So, all I can say is, man, these students, man, are learning a bunch of cupcake bullshit. Even when I went to the university, bruh, I went to Xavier. That's an all-black college and university, but it's important to understand, and no disrespect to Xavier at all, because I love the institution. I love the student body. I got into it with some of the, administration when I was there for, basically playing music that they said I couldn't play, but I played it anyway.
But
You know,
but
I
that's
got.
another thing, GG, right?
But wait a minute though. I want to finish my point. I'm gonna let you talk.
Okay.
So the founder of Xavier University was a white woman, man, a white member. I forget the damn order of nuns that she was a member of, but she founded an all-black university in New Orleans. Her name is Kathleen Drexel. A fucking nun. She was the one that started that shit. You know what I'm saying? So not to take it, because I'm not saying all white people have been doing the best they can to prevent us from being able to do what we can do. I mean, shout out to John Brown, okay? But it ain't enough of them is all I'm saying. It just ain't enough of them. You know what I mean?
Blessed sacrament.
And then at some point, you got to take off the training wheels for black people and let them think independently and not try to direct their thought and their values and their norms and their politics. You got to let them think for themselves. You can't be lording over black people, determining in a patriarchal way or a paternalistic way what they think and the values they're supposed to hold. At some point, you got to say, let them do them. So I'm suspicious of any group of people, whether it be, you know, I know it's a fucked up word to say now, but the Jews in the NAACP or whatever the case may be, at some point, you got to be like, look, they got to do them. It's not my job to sit here and act like their daddies or their mommies while they engage in their politics. But Sandal, go ahead, bro.
Last thing I want to say though, real quick, and I know he's got to jump in. I just want to highlight two things. Number one, it's awkward seeing the gentrification happen in the face of Howard University, because here you are in a neighborhood that's becoming white and is for the most part surrounded by the Black Mecca in Chocolate City. It is jarring to observe this going back there recently, and it's really telling of what's happening with regards to that.
Did you go to Howard U?
No.
Okay, because recently I gave, well, wasn't too long ago. It had to be maybe about 3 years ago. I attended a conference at Howard U, and it was some shit to see. Because I mean, first of all, the infrastructure of Howard University is not where it should be, man.
No.
It's just not. You know what I'm saying? But to see the shit surrounding it and like the development taking place around it, and to know that the people who own and who've invested into that area, to know that they're definitely not black folks. They're just there to capitalize off the student body. You know what I'm saying?
That's my point. Yeah, it's jarring, and it's a pattern that's kind of happening all over the damn country. But that's all I wanted to really highlight and point out, you know, how it plays out to not just the optics, but the way a lot of these policies go. Because again, intersectionalism, if you don't understand what it is and how it works and what you think you know about Black America, is only going to confuse you.
And look, at face value, I wouldn't have a problem with intersectionality, but this is my issue with it. It's not a theory. It's a dogma. It's a doctrine. It's a theory that you have to accept, and if you don't accept it, you're regressive and dangerous and violent. That's my issue with it. So if you come out and critique it, the people who adhere to it or who profess it, they get so defensive to the point where you can't even evaluate it critically. Now, look, I'm not the brightest guy in the world, okay? I do have a doctoral degree that's not saying much. It just means that I work for it. It doesn't mean that I'm like hyper intelligent or anything like that, okay? So for all the people who think that, you know, I think I'm better than them, that's not the case, okay? But here's the deal. This is the way I thought the university was supposed to work. You present a theory or an ideal and you defend it, and it must be exposed to falsification incessantly if it's to uphold its integrity over time. This is the way I thought like the academy was supposed to work, where it doesn't matter what discipline it is. It doesn't matter if it's math, if it's chemistry, if it's physics or philosophy, okay? You present your work and your work gets critiqued in a community of other intellectuals or scholars. That's the way it's supposed to work, okay? You can't, even with African American studies, it has to be that way. It can't be anything different. Okay? And if somebody does challenge your theoretical modus operandi, you defend it in a public forum. You know, with objectivity to some degree. I mean, you can, you know, believe firmly and stand your ground on what you believe, but you still have to make an attempt to make this justifiable. You have to falsify, okay? But unfortunately, in the humanities, what you get is a lot of fucking, you know, self-righteousness. You get a lot of grandstanding, and that's not putting us anywhere, man. But, you know, in a position to get beat down, okay? Now, intersectionality, man, it follows on the coattails of feminism in general, and I don't have a problem with feminism in the right place at the right time for the right reason. But the objectives of feminism have been attained. They've done it. You ask for social and political equality, you got it. Now in certain areas, they're dominating. But do you think they're going to pull back? No, because they're going to continuously make the claim based on analytical grounds alone, and that's just basically ideological grounds or idea categories like of a formal kind, like Plato. I'm a woman, so therefore I'm automatically disadvantaged. Doesn't matter your race, doesn't matter your class, it doesn't matter your upbringing, none of that. What matters is that you belong to an identity category and something naturally ensues from your establishment as being a member of a category that has been designated to be oppressed.
Like, and then what makes it worse is that any rebuttal that's levied against it is partitioned in this idea of patriarchy being something default that you acquire purely by having a Y chromosome, even though it's a modality of systematic organization of peoples, has nothing to do with your biological predisposition. And they try to use that as some sort of means that you are instantly some sort of tyrant. I guess getting into the Duluth model, right? And you acquire all the negative attributes of patriarchy, even though, you know, we understand concepts such as social dominance theory, which prevails across all mammals, including humans, which totally invalidates that whole concept. And that's what makes intersectionalism that much more ridiculous within the Black aggregate, because once more, this has usurped the idea of Black power. It is turned female liberation and made it synonymous with Black liberation, which, as Dr. Tommy Curry breaks down, produces this idea of flat Blackness that makes Black men utterly invisible. And when you line that up with our epigenetic cultural history on the plantation, which presented this resentment, this idea that in order for Black people to succeed, since Black men are going to be disproportionately disadvantaged and little is expected of them, there's going to be that many more resources invested in the women as a result, which just exacerbates this scenario we're talking about. And it just full on obliterates the social contract within Black America, if you can even say there was one, which projects out into the greater society, but it leaves us in this position to where there's no role, no place for Black men outside of, as Dr. Tiasan Johnson describes, a ConcuServe. And I don't know what we're supposed to do with that.
Well, you know, the only thing you can do is to either say, hey, look, I don't think you can convince a group of people who have a system working in their advantage. You know, I just don't see how. Like, I think BGS not too long ago showed a video where there was a white guy explaining the institution of marriage and how seductive it is for women to push, you know, the nuclear button. Like, fuck all this. Because it really doesn't have, you know, any penalty for them. They get rewards for doing it.
So it's the lawyers.
It's a temptation. Okay, so, you know, it's a danger for you as a man. You want to be able to have a legacy and a family that you can connect yourself to, because you want to be able to guide and develop your children, right, over a lifetime, so that, you know, they can know what you know and you can enjoy their presence and they can enjoy yours. But, I mean, we live in a system now to where the daddy really is the state. The court system, the court of chancery is the state. It just is what it is. And it doesn't matter what the conditions or the situation is. She can hit that red button and you got to pay. It's going to be you who has to deal with, you know, the outcome of that decision. And it's a hell of a one to have to go through. I can tell you. I know through experience. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, you basically, you become an uncle daddy. You got to pay child support. But you don't have direct impact over the life of your own child the way you're supposed to. Or the way you think you're supposed to. Or the way you idealize it in your own head. But then you get blamed for being a deadbeat and shit like that. You know, even if you pay, even if you're involved and you know, you go through your visits and shit like that, just imagine what it's come down to now with men in this country. They get to visit their children. A fucking visit my child? What type of shit is this? But, you know, shout out to, you know, shout out to these white boys, man, and these judges and shit. That's what they allowed to go down. But it's coming to bite them in the ass now. All this shit. Because I already laid out the groundwork for why it happened the way it did. Howard Smith, Democrat, Virginia, at the 11th hour of the Civil Rights Act decided to add sex to it. And he did so for a racialized reason. Either one, he thought it was going to, you know, stymie and thwart the passage of the bill, or he wanted to be able to protect white women, okay? And make sure that they had, you know, the same opportunities as black women and black men in the workforce. And, that, you know, that we didn't have an advantage, even though they've been having an advantage, okay? So now look at their college enrollment. White boys, look at how they're doing in high school and in elementary school. A threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So now they got to deal with the blowback from their own policy, which was basically racially, you know, constructed. It was racialized in nature. Now they got to deal with the shit. So
not only that, this is how we get the Decepticons in there as well. I was going to throw a link to that in the chat so people can understand how we keep getting armbarred out of this whole thing, which, you know, now that it's being now that they're disintegrating at Title VI, Title VII may be on the chopping block. And if they do, I mean, it's not like we saw too much out of that anyway as black men, but it's just crazy seeing how this plays out. Yeah, we're expected to participate.
And all these guys on the right who consider themselves to be, you know, self-appointed, you know, fucking exemplary black men, you know, whatever they call themselves, you know, the new black man, the new black man of the manosphere, whatever. Wait till they get rid of this affirmative action shit and see what happened to you. You think that job is your right and it makes you virtuous and all of this. Wait till they say, okay, all right, buddy.
We looked at your end of the year review and yeah.
I ain't saying the Democrats are good, but all I'm saying is you might get what you're asking for. I call it, you know, the malleus malfactorum or some shit like that. That's what I was calling it. The witch's hammer. That shit got some more components to it than just dealing with sex. It deals with race as well. So watch, you know, just be careful. Be careful. That's all I'm saying. But, you know, I'm going to let Sandog take us home, man. And, you know, because we kind of got off the path for the war on drugs. But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, the war on drugs, it primarily impacts who as a demographic? Us. Black men. Is the people who get fucking locked up and partitioned in this culture related to it. It's us. Everybody else getting high and getting paid. But when we even make an attempt to get paid or get high, we get locked the fuck up. Those are just the facts. But everybody's getting high. Sam Kinison was getting high. Shit. Johnny Depp was getting high. How many other white boys been getting high? George Bush was getting high. Rush Limbaugh was getting high. All these motherfuckers getting high. But they get it passed because they got the right complexion for the connection. Just is what it is. But yeah, holla. You know, Rael says affirmative action is outdated in the fourth industrial wave. Bro, Hey, all I can say is, we really haven't gotten much out of it anyway. But god damn, you got to think. I think BGS, man, we might have to talk about this, man. We might have to talk about this affirmative action thing. But, be careful what you wish for. Because these white boys is coming. They like fuck talking about race. And right now they got so flippant about it, they'll say you're a racist and a hater. Shout out to Kyrie Irving. Shout out to Kanye West. Now we the new racists. Straight up, we are. In their eyes, we are the new racists because we even consider race as being important. Although we already know that most of the actions that they engage in have a racist component to it. But we supposed to suspend belief and act like they all see everybody as just the same and they're colorblind or something like that. We really supposed to believe that.
Because we've got a systematic apparatus with which we can utilize and deny opportunities economically, legally, and politically off the virtue of their color, right? That's what we can do as black folks, right?
I had a professor tell me as I, going through graduate school, he was like, well, there's nothing wrong with me associating with my own group. I was like, okay. What you supposed to say to that in response? Because you already know how they think. Now you can poke the bear, but this motherfucker, is in control of your motherfucking academic career. He's in control of handing out a certification to determine whether or not you're going to receive a degree. But, of course I push back anyway, but my whole thing is, bruh, we're talking about more than just the ecology of where you live. We're talking more about you just feeling comfortable around your own people. Even though many of us, quite frankly, how much motherfucking European blood black folks in America got tracing through their motherfucking DNA? Coursing through their DNA. We're the bastard children of the offspring of black and a white union. White male and black women's union. We are them babies. Take it for how you want to take it. It's the truth. It's the truth, man. And you can call it however you want to call it. It's just the truth. So now what do you do with it? In different countries in the Americas during slavery, they had a different kind of system. Portugal and Spain, they had a different tack on race. I'm not saying it was perfect, but it was better than this shit here. Here you had the one drop rule. There, at least, their offspring, sometimes they would acknowledge the fucking offspring as their children. Not here. So now you got a bunch of your bastard children, you locking the motherfuckers up. It's crazy, bro. I'm done, man. I'm gonna let Sand Dog take over, man.
Nah, man, but because it's 5:43 a.m. where I'm at. So, we're headed into it because the last thing I wanted to bring up, with the war on drugs too, because the coup de grace, when Gary Webb, the reporter, came out in '96, right? And so he worked for San Jose Mercury News, and began to allege that the United States government or the Reagan administration allowed the drug trafficking into the United States so that they could fund support for the Sandinistas, for the Sandinistas or better known as the Contras, down there in South America. So, Congress wouldn't, would no longer form those wars. And so, not form, Congress would no longer finance, right? Finance that conflict. So they needed to find a way, they needed to find a way to make money, right? And so, you would get famously what people would know as, Rick Ross, right? And so, Highway Ricky Ross. And, he said, at the point, he made $3 million in a day. And, he testified that, two men, Narwin Meneses and Darillo Reyes, FDM members would supply him, with the cocaine. And it's also alleged that, these men were never charged because, the State Department was also, involved, to help, facilitate, to help facilitate, all of these things. And so it's a very, and, and I remember at the time, I forgot the name of the CIA director, where he was actually confronted, by the Black community for these alleged crimes, against the Black community. And, sad and most unfortunately, ultimately, you're asking the United States government to investigate itself, right? So, they promised to get down to the bottom of any wrongdoing, if it did exist at all. And so, again, right, you're looking at, the CIA, or other agencies, launching an investigation, internally. And we all know pretty much how far that's going to go. So, the thing about it, man, is that this cancer that we have called racism is something that's going to ultimately eat the country inside out. And if the disposition of our fellow Americans with a lighter skin, that you mentioned just now, if that's their disposition, sad and most unfortunately, because it's not just America, but not just within our own borders, but eventually, you're looking at the first time in a long time that the next seat of power is going to be in a nation that's not, that's not from Western Europe or born out of the United States. And it will be up to America in terms of, will the world transition into something new, or whatever that difference is going to be, or are we going to have to burn the planet down and reduce the population, in order for whatever change that's going to come naturally, come anyway. So, chances are, if you have a lot of backlash for what's happening at home, there will certainly be problems when these things, when these changes are accelerated by what's happening internationally. So, like I said, I just wish that for the American public that there was some level of critical thinking, and more than likely, this is why CRT, more than likely why people will have their issues, again with CRT, because one of the things that it does do is that it doesn't allow you, or after you study certain parts of American history, you can no longer look at the country in a sense through the same rose-colored glasses, right? You would walk away, understanding that there's a lot of work to do in order for America to, to live up to its creed, or actually fulfill its ultimate destiny. And if America's ultimate destiny is to become Atlantis, somewhat, as some people would say, then there's a lot of course correction that will need to happen in order for us to get to that point. And so for me, like I said, this is what I have, Gigi, and I'll give, my closing, my closing remark, and all of this is, what I would tell Black America who says that this stuff doesn't exist. I believe that in the series that we've done, we've given you more than enough evidence, from the 1600s up to the Civil War, with the cornerstone speech with the Vice President of the Confederacy, the stances on the different states, Cointelpro, this war on drugs, which would facilitate, later your 94 crime bills, your prison pipeline system, your school to prison systems, private prison industrial complex, whatever you want to call it, et cetera. And then for people, who may feel that they're on this other side of the fence, what you call white people, I would inform you that we are all Americans, man, And what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So when you get the things like power, greed, and all of this stuff, man, those things don't have racial loyalties. Being black won't say, well, being black damn sure hasn't saved you from it, and being white isn't going to save you from it. I would encourage anybody. It's a simple read to read one of my favorite books of all time, and that book is called Animal Farm. And so, be very careful of how you treat your neighbor. Be careful of what you wish for. And shout out to BGS, right? For the age of the diesel, right? Which is another conversation for another time. But be careful for what you wish for, because you just might get it and you might not like what you get. So that's my closing remarks, man. And then, inshallah, we're alive and well. And then I could see you next week for the closing parts for this particular series.
Well, thank you so much, man, Sandog. Appreciate you, brother. Rue. Nameless, you got any closing remarks you want to make, man? And I'm sorry, Mr. Diggy from Detroit, Detroit Diggy, but we about to close this, Siggy, we about to close this joint out, man. We've been on here for like 2.5 hours, so maybe next time we'll catch you on the other tip. But Nameless, can you take us on, brother?
Yeah, just understand once more, you combine all women on planet Earth in all the major populated areas, and you line them side by side with black men that are in prison right now in America, specifically black men, and the numbers are close. That don't make no damn sense. You're not going to convince me that there isn't a targeted effort towards black men systematically. I don't care if you think it's some sort of leftist woke civil or social justice argumentation. This is simple, observable reality, and likely individuals' failure to recognize how systems work and what they're designed to do. Just because it's possible for somebody to live and die and be untouched from these systems doesn't mean that the majority of us are disproportionately being affected by it. We already put the statistics last time to show you that 33% of us have something goofy on our records. That effectively disenfranchises you and keeps you out of the context of being a citizen. And that's the whole point of being in America. It's what we did to get out of slavery, to participate in the system for. Systematic and system are not words of ducking accountability. They are means by which power is experienced. And if you don't understand how power works, I'm not surprised, because slaves don't need to know power. They need to just follow instructions.
Well, having said all that, man, I'm here are my closing remarks, man. You already saw the graph. It's just sitting out there for you to see in plain view. White boys, white women use and deal drugs at the same rates that black people do. But we get incarcerated at damn near 6 times the rate of other populations of persons, right? So shout out to Pookie and them, man. We deserve it. Shout out, we deserve to get locked up, while you go out there and let me stop, because I'm about to say something I ain't got no business saying, man. So there the chart is one last time. There you go. Sell drugs at the same rate, use drugs at a lower rate, get locked up, get arrested hella more, and 6 times as likely as white folks to be incarcerated for it. Shout out to Pookie, man. Thank you, black people in the manosphere, for, creating a paradigm where we give justification and sanction for the destruction of our own people, man. And we got to be accountable for some of the shit we do. But shout out to creating the conditions in which you think this is great. Shout out to y'all, man. Big up to y'all, man. Y'all deserve the Nigga of the Year award, man. God bless y'all, man. I hope you help get more niggas locked up, man. Thank you. Appreciate y'all, man. You doing God's work, man. You being really hyper productive. Thank you. Appreciate y'all. So having said all that, I'm out here, man. I'll holler at y'all later on the next one, man.
Os.
Yeah. Os. Yeah, man.